The blood-red sunset painted the distant mountains as Rosalie Fleming stared at the small homestead she'd just inherited from her late uncle. The journey from Boston to Wyoming Territory in 1876 had been grueling, but nothing compared to the weight of the letter in her pocket, the one revealing the truth about her parents' deaths 15 years ago. "This is it," she muttered, dismounting from the tired mare she'd purchased in Cheyenne. The cabin looked smaller than she'd imagined, its weathered logs and sagging porch a far cry from her aunt's prim townhouse back east. A broken fence encircled what must have once been a garden, now just a patch of sun-baked earth and weeds. Rosalie adjusted her dusty traveling dress and pushed a strand of copper hair from her face. At 23, she'd left behind everything familiar to chase ghosts and justice in a land that already felt too vast, too wild, too empty. The creak of a door hinge made her whirl around, hand instinctively reaching for the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket. "Miss Fleming." A tall figure emerged from the cabin's shadow. "Wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." The man who stepped into the dying light wore trail-worn clothes, a battered hat, and a weathered holster. His dark beard couldn't hide the scar running along his jawline, and his eyes piercing blue assessed her with unmistakable wariness. "And who might you be?" Rosalie demanded, not removing her hand from her pocket. "This is my property now." The corner of his mouth twitched. "Name's Wyatt Callahan. Your uncle hired me to look after this place 6 months back. Told me his niece might be coming someday." He gestured toward the cabin. "Been keeping it maintained, best I could." "Well, Mr. Callahan, your services are no longer required." Rosalie lifted her chin. "I'll be taking over now." Wyatt crossed his arms. "With all due respect, madam, you don't know the first thing about surviving out here. Nearest town's half a day's ride. Winter's coming in a few months, and the Blackwood gang's been raiding homesteads north of here. I'm perfectly capable." A distant howl cut through the evening air, followed by another, closer. Wyatt glanced toward the darkening tree line. "Wolf pack's moving early tonight. Your horse needs tending, and you look about ready to fall over." He stepped aside, gesturing to the door. "There's stew on the stove. We can discuss your plans in the morning." Rosalie wanted to argue, to assert her independence, but exhaustion pulled at her bones. "One night," she conceded. "Then we'll settle your final payment." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly tidy. A small table with 2 chairs occupied one corner, a cast-iron stove with a steaming pot another. A curtain separated what she assumed was a sleeping area. "I'll see to your horse," Wyatt said, already heading back outside. "Make yourself at home." Left alone, Rosalie examined her inheritance. A shelf held a few books, a tarnished pocket watch, and a framed photograph of her uncle, a man she barely remembered. Below it, half hidden by a tin cup, lay a worn leather journal. The journal's pages were filled with her uncle's angular handwriting. Dates, names, places all connected to the Blackwood mining operation. Her fingers trembled as she recognized several names from her parents' old correspondence. The evidence she'd been seeking might be right here. The door opened, and she hastily tucked the journal into her bag. "Horse is settled," Wyatt announced, removing his hat. In the lamplight, she noticed flecks of gray in his dark hair. "How long were you planning to stay, Miss Fleming?" "That's my business, Mr. Callahan." He shrugged. "Suit yourself. But if you're planning more than a week, we'll need to ride into Silverdale for supplies." He ladled stew into 2 bowls. "Town's changed since your uncle's day. New railroads bringing all sorts coming through. Some good, most not. You seem to know a lot about my uncle."
"He was a good man."
"Honest." Wyatt sat across from her. "Rare quality out here." Rosalie accepted the bowl, the savory aroma reminding her how long it had been since she'd eaten. "He wrote to me before he died. Said there were things I needed to know about my parents' accident." Something flickered in Wyatt's eyes. "It wasn't an accident," Rosalie's spoon clattered against the bowl. You knew them? Knew of them. Your father was investigating the Blackwood Mining Company. Fraud, claim jumping, maybe worse. Wyatt's voice dropped. 3 days after he filed his report with the territorial marshal, their carriage went off Miller's Ridge. The mining company is still operating, Rosalie said carefully, studying him. I saw their offices in Cheyenne. Under new management. Same dirty business. Wyatt leaned back. Your uncle picked up your father's investigation. That's why he lived out here, watching their operation on the North Ridge. And now he's dead too. Heart failure, they said. Wyatt's silence spoke volumes. Mr. Callahan, I came here to settle my uncle's affairs and perhaps learn what happened to my parents. Nothing more. Is that why you've got newspaper clippings about the Blackwoods in your saddlebag? I saw them when I was untying your belongings. Rosalie stiffened. You had no right. Lady, if you're hunting the Blackwoods, you're either braver than most men I know or more foolish. He held her gaze. Either way, you won't last a week out here alone. I don't recall asking for your help. No, but your uncle did. Wyatt withdrew a folded paper from his vest. His last letter to me said if you ever came, I was to make sure you stayed safe or kept away altogether. Rosalie snatched the letter, recognizing her uncle's handwriting. It was dated just 3 days before his death. This changes nothing, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I need to know the truth. Truth's a dangerous thing in these parts. Wyatt stood, taking his bowl to the wash basin. Get some rest, Miss Fleming. You can have the bed. I'll take the floor by the stove. That won't be necessary. You'll be leaving tomorrow. He looked at her over his shoulder, something like amusement crossing his weathered features. We'll see. That night, lying in her uncle's bed, Rosalie listened to the unfamiliar sounds of the wilderness coyotes calling, wind rustling through pines, and the occasional shifting of the man sleeping near the stove. Despite her exhaustion, sleep evaded her. The journal hidden beneath her pillow seemed to burn with secrets, and the stranger who somehow knew too much about her family loomed as both potential ally and threat. She would send him away tomorrow, she decided. This was her fight, her past to uncover. Yet even as she made this resolution, a small voice whispered that in this vast, unforgiving territory, going it alone might be the quickest path to joining her family in the grave. Dawn broke with brutal clarity, sunlight streaming through the cabin's single window. Rosalie awoke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was until the events of yesterday came rushing back. She sat up quickly, reaching for the journal under her pillow. It was gone. Panic surged through her as she threw back the blankets. The curtains separating her sleeping area had been drawn back, and the main room was empty. No sign of Wyatt Callahan. Looking for this? She whirled to find him standing in the doorway, her uncle's journal in one hand, 2 steaming mugs in the other. His expression was unreadable. That's mine, she snapped, hastily buttoning the top of her nightdress. Actually, it was your uncle's. Wyatt set the mugs on the table and placed the journal beside them. And it's dangerous. More dangerous than you realize. Rosalie grabbed her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders as she approached. You read it. I've known what's in there for months. Your uncle showed me his findings before he died. He pushed one mug toward her. Coffee's hot. You'll need it. She ignored the offering. You had no right to take it while I slept. Just making sure you weren't planning to ride into Blackwood territory half-cocked. He took a sip from his own mug, which, based on the notes you added in the margins, you were. Her cheeks burned. I'm not some fragile doll that needs protecting, Mr. Callahan. Never said you were. But even the toughest souls need allies in a fight like this. His eyes met hers. James Blackwood has the territorial governor in his pocket, the sheriff on his payroll, and 30 hired guns at his call. What's your plan? March into his office and demand justice. If necessary. Wyatt laughed, though there was no humor in it. Then I'd best stay around to dig your grave afterward. Your concern is noted, but unwelcome. Rosalie snatched up the journal. I'll be heading to Silverdale today. Alone. Silverdale's not safe for you. Blackwood owns half the town. I don't recall asking your permission. She gathered her clothes and disappeared behind the curtain to dress, fuming at his presumption. When she emerged, properly attired in a practical traveling dress, she found Wyatt outside, saddling both their horses. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Coming with you." He tightened a cinch. "Like it or not, Miss Fleming, you've stepped into something bigger than personal revenge. Your uncle was part of a network gathering evidence against Blackwood's operation. Miners dying in suspicious accidents, water supplies poisoned, homesteaders forced out or worse." Rosalie hesitated. "And you're part of this network. Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to see Blackwood swing." Something dark crossed his face. "But we do this smart or we don't do it at all." "I work alone, Mr. Callahan." "Then you die alone." He handed her the reins to her mare. "Your choice." The bluntness of his words struck her. For months she'd planned this journey, imagining herself uncovering the truth single-handedly, bringing her parents' killers to justice. Now, faced with the reality of the wilderness and the power of her enemies, doubt crept in. 2 days, she finally said. "You can accompany me to Silverdale and back. Then we part ways." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "We'll see." They rode in tense silence, the mountains looming ahead as the trail wound through stands of pine and open meadows. By midday, the summer heat had become oppressive, and they stopped beside a creek to water the horses. "Your uncle mentioned you were studying law back east," Wyatt said as they rested in the shade of a cottonwood. Rosalie looked up in surprise. "He told you that?" "Said he was proud of you. First woman in your family to attend university." "I was the only woman in my classes." She absently twisted a blade of grass between her fingers. "They made it abundantly clear I wasn't welcome. Yet you stayed." "I'm stubborn that way." She glanced at him. "How did you come to work for my uncle?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "Long story. We've got time." He seemed to weigh his response. "I was a U.S. Marshal. Worked this territory for 8 years until I started asking questions about a certain mining operation and the deaths connected to it." His hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his jawline. "Woke up one night with my cabin on fire and 2 of Blackwood's men waiting outside. They tried to kill you? They succeeded in killing my wife and son." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I buried them and disappeared. Your uncle found me 6 months later, drinking myself to death in a Colorado saloon." Rosalie's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." "It was 3 years ago." He stood abruptly. "We should keep moving if we want to reach town before dark." As they continued their journey, Rosalie found herself reassessing the man riding beside her. His loss explained the hardness in his eyes, the careful way he scanned the horizon. It also explained why he might be willing to help her. They shared a common enemy. By late afternoon, the outline of Silverdale appeared in the distance. What had once been a small mining settlement had grown into a proper town, complete with a church steeple and several 2-story buildings. Most prominent was the new railroad station at the eastern edge. "We'll stable the horses at Miller's," Wyatt said as they approached. "Then find rooms at the boarding house." "Rooms?" Rosalie raised an eyebrow. "Separate rooms," he clarified, "but close enough that I can hear if there's trouble." She wanted to object, but thought better of it. "And tomorrow?" "Tomorrow we start asking careful questions. Very careful." He slowed his horse as they neared the town's outskirts. "Follow my lead in there. Silverdale may look civilized, but it's still wild territory beneath the paint." The main street bustled with activity. Wagons loaded with timber and ore rumbled past. Men in various states of cleanliness moved between the saloon and general store. A group of Chinese workers huddled near the blacksmith, speaking in hushed tones. Rosalie noticed how conversations paused as they rode past, how eyes followed them with curiosity and, in some cases, hostility. "They're staring," she murmured. "Strangers always draw attention," Wyatt replied. "Especially well-dressed women traveling with men who look like me." At the livery stable, the owner, a bent-backed man with only 3 fingers on his right hand, recognized Wyatt with a nod. "Callahan. Been a while." "Miller. Need boarding for 2 horses." The man's rheumy eyes shifted to Rosalie. "This the niece." "This is Miss Fleming," Wyatt said pointedly. "Just in from Boston to settle her uncle's affairs." "My condolences, miss. Your uncle was one of the good ones." "Thank you," Rosalie replied, wondering how many people in this town had known her uncle and how many knew what had happened to him. After securing the horses, they made their way to a modest 2-story building with a sign proclaiming Mrs. Harrington's boarding house. The proprietress, a stout woman with steel-gray hair pinned severely at her nape, regarded them with suspicion until Wyatt mentioned Rosalie's uncle. "Fleming's niece, you say?" Her expression softened slightly. "He spoke of you often, dear. Said you had his sister's spirit." "You knew him well?" Rosalie asked. "Well enough." Mrs. Harrington's eyes flicked to Wyatt. "And you, sir? What's your business with Miss Fleming?" "He worked for my uncle," Rosalie interjected before Wyatt could answer. "He's helping me settle the estate." The woman didn't look convinced, but showed them to adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor. "Dinner's at 6 sharp. No gentlemen callers in the ladies' rooms after 8. When she'd gone, Wyatt spoke in a low voice. "Be careful what you say here. Walls have ears. Is there anyone in this town who isn't part of some conspiracy?" Rosalie whispered back. "Few and far between." He checked the window latch. "Get settled. We'll meet downstairs for dinner. Try to look like you're just here on family business, nothing more." "I am here on family business," she replied. "Just not the kind they expect." Dinner at Mrs. Harrington's boarding house was a subdued affair. Besides Rosalie and Wyatt, there were only 3 other guests: a traveling salesman, a young schoolteacher awaiting the completion of the town's first schoolhouse, and an elderly man who introduced himself as the new telegraph operator. Conversation revolved around safe topics: the railroad's progress, the unusually dry summer, the schoolteacher's plans for her pupils. Rosalie played her part, speaking of Boston and her journey west with carefully crafted enthusiasm. "And how long do you plan to stay in our little town, Miss Fleming?" the schoolteacher, Miss Wilson, inquired. "Just long enough to settle my uncle's affairs," Rosalie replied. "Though I admit, the territory has a certain untamed beauty I wasn't expecting." "Beauty and danger often go hand in hand out here," Mrs. Harrington commented, passing a bowl of potatoes. "A young woman alone should take care." "Miss Fleming isn't alone," Wyatt said quietly. "She has me." Something in his tone made the table fall silent for a moment. "Well," the salesman finally said, "you're fortunate to have a protector, Miss Fleming. These mountains can be treacherous for those unfamiliar with their ways." After dinner, Rosalie and Wyatt stepped onto the boarding house porch. The evening air had cooled, and stars were beginning to appear above the mountain ridges. "You handled that well," Wyatt said, lighting a cigarette. "I've had practice playing roles." She watched the smoke curl upward. "Growing up in my aunt's house, I learned to be what others expected: the grateful orphan, the dutiful niece, the proper young lady." "And who are you when no one's watching?" The question caught her off guard.
"I'm
not entirely sure anymore." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man on horseback who dismounted in front of the adjacent building, the sheriff's office. Even in the dimming light, Rosalie could see the silver star pinned to his chest. "Sheriff Townsend," Wyatt murmured. "Blackwood's right hand in town." The sheriff paused, noticing them on the porch. After a moment's hesitation, he approached, hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "Evening, folks." his gaze fixed on Wyatt. Don't believe I've seen you in Silverdale before. Just passing through, Wyatt replied evenly. Helping the lady settle her uncle's estate. The sheriff's attention shifted to Rosalie. You must be Fleming's niece from back east. Word travels fast in small towns.
He tipped his hat.
Sorry about your loss, madam. Your uncle was well regarded by some. Thank you, Sheriff. Rosalie forced a polite smile. I understand you knew him? Our paths crossed. His eyes narrowed slightly. If you need any assistance during your stay, my office is right there. That's very kind. The sheriff nodded, his gaze returning to Wyatt with undisguised suspicion. Enjoy your evening. After he'd entered his office, Rosalie released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding.
He knows something.
He knows everything, Wyatt corrected, dropping a cigarette and grinding it beneath his boot. And he'll have a telegram sent to Blackwood tonight, letting him know you're here. Good. At Wyatt's surprised look, she continued, I want Blackwood to know I'm here. I want him wondering what I know, what evidence I might have. That's a dangerous game, Rosalie. It was the first time he'd used her given name. Somehow, it made his warning feel more personal, more urgent. Every game with high stakes is dangerous, she replied. But sometimes it's the only way to flush out the truth. Wyatt shook his head. You're either the bravest or the most reckless woman I've ever met. I've been called worse. She turned toward the door. Good night, Mr. Callahan. I'll see you at breakfast. In her room, Rosalie lit the lamp and retrieved her uncle's journal from her bag. For hours, she pored over his meticulous notes, property deeds, witness accounts, maps of mining claims. One entry from just weeks before his death caught her attention. JB expanding north. New Chinese laborers brought in under cover of night. Conditions abysmal. Worker found dead yesterday, suicide, they claim, but marks on neck tell different story. WC investigating. WC Wyatt Callahan. So he'd been working with her uncle even before he officially hired him. A soft knock at her door startled her. She hastily closed the journal and moved to answer, expecting Mrs. Harrington with extra blankets or perhaps Miss Wilson seeking company. Instead, she found a folded piece of paper that had been slipped under her door. Opening it, she read the hastily scrawled message. Meet tomorrow. Noon. Chinese laundry at end of Pine Street.
Come alone.
Friend of your uncle. Rosalie stared at the note, uncertainty washing over her. It could be a trap, or it could be the lead she needed. Either way, she knew she wouldn't be mentioning it to Wyatt. His protectiveness, while occasionally reassuring, was becoming an impediment to her investigation. She would meet this mysterious friend tomorrow, alone, regardless of the risk. Some answers were worth the danger. The morning dawned clear and cool, with the promise of another scorching day ahead. Rosalie dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue dress that wouldn't attract undue attention. At breakfast, she maintained casual conversation, giving no hint of her planned meeting. I thought we might visit the land office today, Wyatt suggested as they finished their meal. Check the status of your uncle's property claim. Actually, I was hoping to do some shopping, Rosalie countered smoothly. My traveling clothes are hardly suitable for extended wear, and I'd like to mail some letters back east. Wyatt frowned. Shopping can wait. We need to, Mr. Callahan, she interrupted, keeping her voice pleasant for the benefit of the other diners. I appreciate your concern, but I am perfectly capable of spending a few hours in town unaccompanied. This isn't Boston, but it's hardly the wilderness. It's more dangerous than you realize. Then perhaps you could use the time to gather information at the saloon. Men talk more freely without ladies present, do they not? He studied her face, clearly suspecting she had other motives.
Fine.
Meet me back here at 2 o'clock. Not a minute later. Of course. She smiled sweetly. I wouldn't dream of worrying you. After breakfast, they parted ways on the main street. Rosalie made a show of entering the general store, aware that Wyatt lingered nearby, watching. She spent a reasonable amount of time examining fabrics and purchasing a few necessities before slipping out the side door when the shopkeeper was occupied with another customer. Pine Street lay at the eastern edge of town, a narrow lane lined with smaller businesses. The Chinese laundry was easy to spot, a modest building with characters painted on a wooden sign hanging above the door. As she approached, Rosalie felt the weight of eyes following her progress. A Chinese woman sweeping the boardwalk outside the adjacent building paused, her dark eyes assessing Rosalie before she disappeared inside. The laundry itself was empty of customers when Rosalie entered, though the air was heavy with steam and the scent of soap. A young Chinese man looked up from his work, surprise evident on his face. "I'm looking for." Rosalie hesitated, realizing she didn't have a name. "I received a message to meet someone here." The man's expression remained neutral, but he nodded toward a curtained doorway at the back. "Through there. They wait." Heart pounding, Rosalie moved past rows of drying clothes toward the curtain. Her hand instinctively touched the small derringer hidden in her pocket before she pushed the fabric aside. The back room was small and dimly lit by a single window. Seated at a table was an elderly Chinese man and, to Rosalie's surprise, Mrs. Harrington from the boarding house. "Come in, dear," the landlady said, gesturing to an empty chair. "And close the curtain. We don't have much time." "You're my uncle's friend?" Rosalie asked, confused. "One of them." Mrs. Harrington's stern demeanor had softened slightly. "This is Mr. Wu. He was your uncle's most trusted confidant in town." The elderly man nodded respectfully. "Miss Fleming, your uncle spoke highly of your intelligence and courage. Both will be needed now." "I don't understand. Why all the secrecy?" "Because what we're about to tell you could get us all killed," Mrs. Harrington replied bluntly. "Your uncle wasn't just investigating Blackwood's business practices. He discovered something far worse." Mr. Wu placed a weathered hand on a stack of papers on the table. "Blackwood Mining uses opium to control workers. Chinese laborers brought in debt, forced to work in worse conditions. When they die accident, exhaustion, suicide, Blackwood brings more. He's running a slave operation under the guise of a legitimate business," Mrs. Harrington added. "Your uncle gathered evidence, testimonies from escaped workers. He was preparing to take it to the federal authorities in Denver when he died." "Died or was murdered," Rosalie said quietly. "No proof of murder," Mr. Wu replied. "But man who brings food to your uncle that night now works in Blackwood's main office. Paid very well for simple clerk." Rosalie's mind raced. "My parents, they discovered this too?" Mrs. Harrington nodded grimly. "Your father was a mining inspector. He found discrepancies in Blackwood's records, missing workers, unreported deaths. When he started asking questions, they killed him. And my mother." "We believe so." The landlady reached for Rosalie's hand. "Your uncle continued their work in secret. Now that burden falls to you if you choose to accept it. What about Wyatt Callahan? Where does he fit in all this?" The two exchanged glances. "Callahan is complicated," Mrs. Harrington said carefully. "After his family was killed, he went on a rampage. Killed 3 of Blackwood's men before your uncle found him. He's driven by revenge, not justice." "Can he be trusted?" "With your safety, yes," Mr. Wu said. "With making wise decisions when confronting Blackwood? Not certain." Rosalie absorbed this information, reassessing everything she thought she knew about Wyatt. "What do you need from me?" "Your uncle hid the most damning evidence," Mrs. Harrington explained. "Said only his blood would know where to look. We assumed he meant you. I've been through his cabin, his journal. There was nothing that specifically." Rosalie stopped, remembering something. The pocket watch on the shelf. It wasn't ticking. Mr. Wu's eyes widened slightly. "Pocket watch belonged to your father. And it was always with my uncle, according to his letters." Yet he left it behind when he came to town that last time. Rosalie leaned forward. I need to return to the cabin. Too dangerous alone, Mr. Wu insisted. Sheriff watches roads. I won't be alone. I'll have Wyatt. Mrs. Harrington frowned. Be careful what you tell him, dear. Men like Callahan, men consumed by vengeance, they can be unpredictable. I can handle Mr. Callahan, Rosalie assured her, with more confidence than she felt. Mr. Wu slid the stack of papers toward her. Take these. Testimonies from workers who escaped. Names, dates, locations of unmarked graves. Add to your uncle's evidence. Rosalie carefully folded the papers and tucked them into her handbag. How do I contact you if I find something? You don't, Mrs. Harrington said firmly. Too risky. We'll contact you when necessary. She glanced at the window. You should go. Take different route back to Main Street. As Rosalie stood to leave, Mr. Wu caught her wrist. Your uncles say something else. Say you hard to love because you too stubborn, too brave for own good. A faint smile touched his weathered face. Like your father. The unexpected mention of her father brought a lump to Rosalie's throat. Thank you for telling me that. She slipped out through a back door into an alley, making her way through a maze of smaller streets until she reached the main thoroughfare. Her mind whirled with new information, new suspicions, and a growing sense that she was deeper in danger than she'd realized. Lost in thought, she nearly collided with a broad-chested man exiting the telegraph office. Looking up to apologize, the words died in her throat. Though she'd never seen him before, his fine clothes and commanding presence, coupled with the deference shown by those nearby, told her exactly who he was. James Blackwood. He was older than she'd expected, perhaps in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and cold eyes that assessed her with immediate interest. Pardon me, miss, he said, his voice cultured, betraying Eastern education. I wasn't watching where I was going. The fault is mine, sir, Rosalie managed, fighting to keep her voice steady. You must be new to our little town. I make it a point to know all the lovely ladies who grace Silverdale with their presence. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. James Blackwood, at your service. Rosalie Fleming, she replied, seeing no point in using a false name when he likely already knew who she was. I'm just passing through, settling my late uncle's affairs. Fleming. He repeated the name slowly, watching her reaction. My condolences. Heart trouble, wasn't it? Such a tragedy. Yes, quite unexpected, she agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. He always seemed so vital in his letters. One never knows when death might come calling. Blackwood adjusted his gold watch chain. If there's anything I can do to assist you during your stay, please don't hesitate to ask. My company employs half the town. We consider ourselves one big family here. How kind. I'll certainly keep that in mind. Good day, Miss Fleming. He tipped his hat and moved past her, but not before adding in a lower voice, Do give my regards to your companion, Mr. Callahan. Old acquaintances are so refreshing to encounter. Rosalie stood frozen as he continued down the street, the threat in his words unmistakable. He knew Wyatt was with her. He knew everything. She hurried back toward the boarding house, no longer concerned with appearing casual. Turning a corner, she nearly ran headlong into Wyatt himself. Where the hell have you been? He demanded, gripping her elbow and pulling her into the shadow of a building. I've been looking everywhere. I was shopping, as I said I would be. With your packages still at the general store? His blue eyes blazed. Don't lie to me, Rosalie. Not when your life depends on the truth. I just met Blackwood, she said instead of arguing. Or rather, he arranged to meet me. He knows who I am, who you are. He mentioned you specifically. The color drained from Wyatt's face. What exactly did he say? She repeated Blackwood's parting words. He's letting us know he's watching. We need to leave.
Now.
Wyatt glanced around the street. Pack your things. We'll be gone within the hour.
No.
Rosalie pulled her arm free. I'm not running away. I came here for answers, for justice. I won't be intimidated. This isn't about courage, Rosalie. It's about survival. His voice dropped to a harsh whisper. Blackwood doesn't make threats. He eliminates problems. The fact that he approached you in broad daylight means he's already decided how this ends. All the more reason to act quickly. She met his gaze unflinchingly. I need to return to my uncle's cabin. There's evidence hidden there, something in my father's pocket watch. Wyatt stared at her. How do you know that? I have my sources. When he opened his mouth to protest, she cut him off. Sources I won't reveal, even to you. Either help me or step aside, Mr. Callahan, but I am going back to that cabin. For a long moment, he said nothing, the muscle in his jaw working as he visibly struggled with her declaration. You're the most infuriating woman I've ever met, he finally growled. So, I've been told. We leave at dawn, he said, his tone making it clear this wasn't a suggestion. And you will follow my lead when it comes to security. No wandering off, no secret meetings. Fine, she agreed, knowing she had little choice if she wanted his help. Dawn it is. They spent the remainder of the day preparing for their departure, purchasing supplies, and avoiding public places where Blackwood's men might be watching. That evening, as Rosalie packed her few belongings, a soft knock came at her door. It was Miss Wilson, the schoolteacher, looking nervous. Forgive the intrusion, she whispered, but Mrs. Harrington asked me to give you this. She pressed a folded paper into Rosalie's hand. Be careful, Miss Fleming. The walls truly do have ears here. Before Rosalie could respond, the young woman hurried away. The note was brief. B's men watching roads. Take East Trail by Creek. Wu has a ranged guide. Trust no one else. Rosalie burned the note in the lamp flame, watching the paper curl and blacken until nothing remained but ash. Tomorrow would bring them closer to answers or to danger beyond anything she'd prepared for. As promised, they departed before sunrise, slipping out of town via the East Trail that ran alongside a narrow creek. Wyatt led the way, his rifle across his saddle, constantly scanning their surroundings. They rode in silence until the town was well behind them. Care to tell me how you knew about this trail? Wyatt finally asked. It's not on any maps. My sources, Rosalie replied simply. The same ones who warned me Blackwood's men would be watching the main roads. These sources have names? None I'm willing to share. Wyatt's expression darkened. I can't protect you if you keep secrets. I never asked for your protection, she reminded him. Only your assistance. Stubborn woman, he muttered. Overbearing man, she countered. Despite the tension, Rosalie found herself strangely comfortable in his company. His protectiveness, while occasionally stifling, stemmed from genuine concern, something she'd experienced rarely in her life. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of bread and dried beef. The mountains loomed closer now, the trail gradually climbing toward higher elevations. We should reach the cabin by nightfall, Wyatt said, checking his pocket watch. Assuming we don't encounter any trouble. And if we do? He patted his rifle. I'm prepared for trouble. Have you killed many men, Mr. Callahan? The question escaped before she could consider its propriety. Wyatt's expression closed off. More than I care to remember. Less than some would claim. He met her gaze. Does that frighten you? No, she answered truthfully. In fact, it reassures me. Something shifted in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or reluctant admiration. You're unlike any woman I've ever known, Rosalie Fleming. I'll take that as a compliment. It was meant as one. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither seemed willing to name. Rosalie looked away first, uncomfortable with the sudden warmth in her cheeks. We should continue, she said, rising to her feet. daylight won't last forever. They resumed their journey, the trail narrowing as it wound through dense pine forest. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered over the mountains, and distant thunder rumbled ominously. "Storm's coming," Wyatt observed. "Might be best to find shelter." "How far are we from the cabin?" "Another hour, maybe more in this terrain." Rosalie studied the darkening sky. "Let's press on. I'd rather risk a bit of rain than spend another night away from our destination." He didn't argue, though his expression suggested he wanted to. The storm hit with unexpected ferocity 20 minutes later. Rain lashed down in blinding sheets, transforming the dirt trail into a muddy river within minutes. Lightning split the sky, followed by cracks of thunder that made the horses skittish. "We need to get off this ridgeline," Wyatt shouted over the deluge, pointing to a stand of trees below. "Too exposed up here." They guided their mounts down the slippery slope, the animals struggling for footing in the rapidly deteriorating conditions. Rosalie's mare suddenly stumbled, nearly throwing her as the horse fought to regain its balance. "Careful," Wyatt called, reaching out to steady her reins. No sooner had they reached the relative shelter of the trees than a tremendous bolt of lightning struck a tall pine not 50 yards away. The deafening crack was followed by the ominous splintering of wood as the tree began to topple directly toward them. Wyatt reacted instantly, spurring his horse forward and grabbing Rosalie around the waist. With a powerful yank, he pulled her from her saddle onto his horse, just as the massive pine crashed down, missing them by inches, but striking her mare's hindquarters. The injured horse bolted in panic, disappearing into the storm with Rosalie's saddlebags still attached. "Are you hurt?" Wyatt's voice was urgent in her ear, his arms still tight around her waist as they balanced precariously on his horse. "No," she managed, breathless from the sudden rescue. "But my bag's the documents. We'll find your horse later. Right now we need shelter." He urged his mount forward, navigating carefully through the trees with Rosalie pressed against his chest. The rain continued unabated for another half hour as they made slow progress. Rosalie was soaked to the skin, shivering despite the warmth of Wyatt's body behind her. Finally, through the curtain of rain, a familiar shape emerged: her uncle's cabin. Once inside, Wyatt moved with practiced efficiency, lighting the stove and lamps while Rosalie stood dripping on the rough plank floor, too cold to be of much help. "You need to get out of those wet clothes," he said, dragging her trunk from the corner where they'd left it days earlier. "I'll see to the horse." When he'd gone, Rosalie peeled off her sodden dress and undergarments with numbed fingers. She found a nightgown and heavy shawl in her trunk, along with a blanket that she wrapped around her shoulders. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably as she moved closer to the stove, holding her hands toward the growing warmth. Wyatt returned some minutes later, equally drenched. He paused in the doorway at the sight of her in her nightclothes, water still dripping from his hat brim. "The horse is settled," he said gruffly, removing his hat and coat. "Storm's easing up." "You should change too," she suggested, noticing how his shirt clung to his broad shoulders. "There might be some of my uncle's clothes in that chest." He nodded, taking the chest she indicated to the curtained sleeping area. When he emerged, he wore a dry shirt that strained across his chest and clean trousers slightly too short for his frame. "Not a perfect fit," he admitted, running a hand through his damp hair. "Better than pneumonia." Rosalie had managed to stop shivering, though exhaustion now weighed heavily on her. "Thank you for saving me from that falling tree. Just doing my job." He busied himself building up the fire in the stove. "Though you've made it a damned difficult one so far." "I never claimed to be easy." Wyatt looked up at that, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "No, you certainly didn't." They shared a simple meal of canned beans and coffee, the storm gradually fading to a gentle rainfall that pattered soothingly on the cabin roof. Despite her exhaustion, Rosalie's mind was alert, focused on the task ahead. The pocket watch, she said when they'd finished eating. It should still be on that shelf. Wyatt retrieved it without comment, placing the tarnished silver timepiece on the table between them. Rosalie picked it up, examining it carefully. It looked ordinary enough old, well used, the initials EF engraved on the back for Edward Fleming, her father. What are we looking for? Wyatt asked. I'm not entirely sure. She turned it over in her hands, then tried to open it. The catch seemed stuck. It won't open. Wyatt held out his hand. May I? She passed it to him, watching as his strong fingers worked at the clasp. After a moment, there was a soft click, but instead of the watch face appearing, the entire back panel came loose. False bottom, he murmured, carefully removing a tightly folded piece of paper hidden inside. Clever. Rosalie's heart raced as she took the paper and gently unfolded it. It was a map detailed, hand-drawn showing the mountains north of Silverdale. Several locations were marked with X's, and along the bottom edge, in her uncle's handwriting, mass graves. 27 confirmed victims. Testimony buried at marked tree. My God, she whispered. He found where Blackwood buried the bodies. Wyatt studied the map over her shoulder. These locations are all on Blackwood's mining claims. Isolated, difficult to access, without crossing his property. Which is why no one has discovered them. Your uncle must have been gathering evidence for years. He pointed to a circled location near a creek. This mark is different. Could be where he hid witness testimonies. We need to find it, Rosalie decided. All of it. The graves, the testimonies, everything necessary to bring Blackwood to justice. It's not that simple. This is Blackwood's territory. He has men patrolling it day and night. Then we'll need to be careful. Rosalie folded the map and tucked it into her nightgown pocket. But I'm not leaving until I have what I came for. Wyatt ran a hand over his beard, clearly conflicted. You realize what you're asking? To venture into the heart of Blackwood's operation with just the two of us against his small army. I'm not asking you to come with me. Like hell you're going alone, he growled. Then it seems we're in agreement. She met his gaze steadily. We go together. Wyatt shook his head, but she could see resignation in his eyes. Your uncle was right about you. Stubborn as a mule. He said that. Among other things. A faint smile touched Wyatt's lips. He also said you were the smartest Fleming he'd ever known. Braver than most men he'd met. Something warm unfurled in Rosalie's chest at the words. I wish I'd known him better. He spoke of you often. Wyatt's voice softened. Said you reminded him of your mother, her determination, her sense of justice. You never mentioned that before. Wasn't sure how much you needed to hear about family you'd lost. He looked away, his own grief momentarily visible. Sometimes memories are more painful than comforting. The vulnerability in his admission touched her. This man, who presented such a hard exterior to the world, had depths she was only beginning to glimpse. Tell me about your son, she said gently. If you don't mind. Wyatt stiffened, and for a moment, she thought he might refuse. Then his shoulders slumped slightly. Michael. He was 5. The words came slowly, as if each one had to be dragged from some locked place inside him. Smart boy. Always asking questions. Wanted to be a lawman like his pa. A ghost of a smile touched his lips.
Sarah, my wife, she worried about that.
Said one Callahan with a badge was trouble enough. She sounds like a wise woman. Smartest decision she ever made was marrying me, according to her. His attempt at humor fell flat, grief shadowing his eyes. Worst decision too, as it turned out. What happened to them wasn't your fault, Rosalie said quietly.
Wasn't it?
Bitterness edged his voice. I brought Blackwood's vengeance down on them. I knew the risks of investigating him, yet I persisted. You were upholding the law, protecting others, and failing to protect those who mattered most. He stood abruptly, moving to stare out the window at the rain-drenched darkness. 3 years, and not a day passes I don't see their faces. Hear Michael calling for me as the flames spread. Feel Sarah's hand slipping from mine when I tried to pull her from the burning bedroom. Rosalie rose, moving to stand beside him. Is that how you got the scar? Trying to save them? His hand unconsciously touched his jawline. Roof beam collapsed. Caught me here. His voice dropped to a whisper. Should have been me that died that night, not them. Without thinking, Rosalie reached out, her fingers gently touching the raised line of his scar. Then who would help me bring Blackwood to justice? Who would honor their memory by finishing what you started? Wyatt caught her hand, his grip firm, yet gentle. You truly aren't afraid of anything, are you? I'm afraid of many things, she admitted. Failure. Injustice. Letting my parents' deaths go unanswered. She met his gaze. But I'm not afraid of you, Wyatt Callahan, despite your best efforts to be intimidating. Something shifted in his eyes, a softening, a surrender. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending unexpected warmth through her veins. You should be, he murmured. I'm not a good man, Rosalie. Not anymore. I think you're better than you believe. She didn't pull her hand away. And I think you're not nearly as hard as you pretend to be. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. Wyatt's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a breathless instant, Rosalie thought he might kiss her. Part of her, a surprising, reckless part, wanted him to. Instead, he released her hand and stepped back. You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be difficult. The sudden distance left her oddly disappointed. Yes, of course.
Good night, Mr.
Callahan. Wyatt, he corrected softly. After everything, I think you've earned the right to use my given name. Good night, Wyatt, she amended, a small smile touching her lips. Good night, Rosalie. As she lay in her uncle's bed that night, listening to the diminishing rainfall and Wyatt's movements in the main room, Rosalie wondered at the strange turn her journey had taken. She'd come seeking justice, expecting to work alone. Instead, she'd found an unlikely ally in this complex, damaged man who seemed to understand her quest better than anyone. More unsettling was the realization that somewhere along the way, his welfare had become important to her, not just as a protector or guide, but as someone she cared about. Such feelings were dangerous distractions from her purpose, yet she couldn't quite bring herself to regret them. Tomorrow they would venture into Blackwood's territory, risking everything for evidence that might finally bring him to justice. Tonight, however, in the quiet darkness of the cabin, Rosalie allowed herself to acknowledge the truth she'd been avoiding. Wyatt Callahan had somehow breached the carefully constructed walls around her heart, and she wasn't entirely certain she wanted to rebuild them. Dawn broke clear and bright, the storm having washed away the summer dust and left the mountain air crisp and clean. Rosalie dressed in her most practical outfit, a split riding skirt and sturdy blouse, and braided her copper hair tightly at her nape. Today was not a day for feminine frivolities. She found Wyatt already awake, cleaning his revolver at the table. A mug of coffee waited for her. Your mare returned, he announced without preamble. Saddlebags still attached, though somewhat worse for wear. Relief coursed through her. The documents? Damp but legible. I spread them near the stove to dry. He nodded toward the papers laid out carefully on a shelf. You've been busy gathering evidence. Was my entle. She sipped the strong coffee. Have you studied the map further? Yes. Wyatt holstered his revolver and unfolded the map between them. The marked tree is here, about 4 miles northeast. Difficult terrain, but approachable without crossing Blackwood's main property line. And the graves. His expression darkened. Those will be more challenging. They're scattered across Blackwood's land, all in remote locations. We'll start with the testimonies, Rosalie decided. That evidence, combined with what we already have, might be enough to convince a federal judge to issue search warrants for the grave sites. Wyatt nodded approvingly. Smart approach. Less risk. I can be practical when necessary. She finished her coffee and reached for her hat. Shall we? They set out on horseback, Rosalie now riding her recovered mare, following game trails that wound through dense forest. Wyatt led the way, occasionally consulting the map, while Rosalie kept watch behind them. The morning passed quietly, the only sounds those of birds and the soft thudding of their horses' hooves on the pine needle carpet. By midday, they'd climbed to higher elevation, where the trees thinned and views opened to reveal the breathtaking expanse of the Rocky Mountains. In another circumstance, Rosalie might have paused to admire the scenery. Today, her focus remained on their mission. "We're close," Wyatt announced, dismounting and tethering his horse to a young aspen. "Best to continue on foot from here. Less visible." Rosalie followed suit, securing her mare beside his gelding. "How will we recognize this marked tree? I'm guessing it'll be distinctive somehow." He checked his weapons, the revolver at his hip and a smaller one tucked into his boot. "Stay close to me." They moved cautiously through the trees, Wyatt constantly scanning their surroundings for signs of danger. After 20 minutes of careful progress, they came to a small clearing dominated by an ancient pine. Unlike its neighbors, this tree bore a crude carving in its trunk, the letters YEF within a rough circle. "Edward Fleming," Rosalie whispered, touching the carving. "My father's initials." "Your uncle was honoring him," Wyatt said softly, continuing his work. Emotion threatened to overwhelm her, but Rosalie pushed it aside. Where would he hide the testimonies? Wyatt circled the massive trunk, examining it carefully. "Here." He pointed to a section where the bark appeared disturbed. "Someone's dug into this recently." Together they knelt at the base of the tree. Wyatt withdrew a hunting knife and carefully pried away a section of bark, revealing a small hollow beneath. Inside was an oilskin-wrapped package about the size of a book. Rosalie's hands trembled slightly as she unwrapped it, revealing a leather-bound journal similar to her uncle's, but older, more worn. Opening it, she found page after page of handwritten accounts, dates, names, detailed descriptions of abuses suffered by workers at Blackwood's mines. "This is my father's handwriting," she said, voice thick with emotion. "He was documenting everything years ago." "And your uncle continued after his death." Wyatt gently turned several pages, stopping at one that contained a crude map. "Look, locations of more evidence. Photographs, official documents, Blackwood falsified." "This is it." Rosalie clutched the journal. "With this and the other evidence, we can finally expose him." "We need to get this to safety first." Wyatt rewrapped the journal in the oilskin. "Federal Marshal's office in Denver would be best." "Denver is days away. Blackwood could discover we have this before." A twig snapped in the distance, silencing her instantly. Wyatt's hand flew to his revolver as he scanned the surrounding trees. "We're not alone," he breathed, barely audible. "Take the journal. If anything happens, run for the horses. Head west toward the creek, then south to the cabin." "I won't leave you," she protested quietly. "This isn't a debate." His eyes never stopped moving, searching for the threat. "The evidence is what matters. Get it to Denver, with or without me." Before she could argue further, a voice called from the trees. Quite a touching scene. The Avenger and the Crusader, united in their misguided quest for justice. James Blackwood stepped into the clearing, flanked by 4 armed men. Among them, Rosalie recognized Sheriff Townsend from Silverdale. "Miss Fleming, Mr. Callahan." Blackwood's smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "I believe you're trespassing on private property." Wyatt had positioned himself slightly in front of Rosalie, his hand still on his holstered weapon. "This land isn't yours, Blackwood. It's federal territory. A technicality I'm addressing with the governor next month." Blackwood's gaze fixed on the package in Rosalie's hands. "I see you've found something that interests you. Family heirlooms, perhaps?" Evidence of your crimes, Rosalie replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Murders, fraud, enslavement, quite the legacy you've built. Blackwood laughed, the sound chilling in its lack of humor. Brave words from a woman in your position. Your father had similar courage. Pity it didn't serve him well in the end. You killed him, she said, the accusation hanging in the air between them. You had my parents murdered. Business necessities, my dear. Nothing personal. His casual tone made the admission all the more horrifying, just as your uncle's unfortunate heart failure was simply expedient. Wyatt's whole body had tensed, coiled like a spring ready to release. Give me one reason not to put a bullet in you right now. Besides my men outnumbering you? Blackwood gestured lazily. Perhaps because Miss Fleming would not survive the experience. Or because killing me changes nothing. My operation continues. My partners in Denver and San Francisco ensure that. You'll face justice, Rosalie declared. If not today, then soon. This evidence won't remain buried forever. Such faith in justice. Blackwood sighed theatrically. Your family's most endearing and destructive quality. He nodded to his men. Take them.
Separate them.
Mr. Callahan and I have unfinished business from 3 years ago. The men advanced, weapons raised. Wyatt's hand tightened on his revolver. When I move, run, he whispered to Rosalie. Don't be foolish, she pleaded. They'll kill you. Some things are worth dying for. His blue eyes met hers for one intense moment. Some people too. Before she could respond, Wyatt drew and fired in one fluid motion. His first shot caught the nearest gunman in the shoulder, spinning him backward. His second struck Sheriff Townsend's leg, sending him crashing to the ground. Run, Wyatt shouted, diving sideways as the remaining men opened fire. Chaos erupted in the clearing. Rosalie clutched the journal and bolted for the trees, heart pounding as bullets splintered bark around her. Behind her, she heard Wyatt exchanging fire, keeping Blackwood's men occupied to cover her escape. She ran blindly at first, then forced herself to slow, to remember Wyatt's instructions. West to the creek, then south. Her lungs burned with each breath, the oilskin package clutched against her chest like a lifeline. The sharp report of gunfire continued behind her, then suddenly ceased. The silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the chaos had been. Rosalie reached the horses, hands shaking as she untied both animals. She should flee, as Wyatt had instructed. The evidence was what mattered, the culmination of her father's and uncle's sacrifice, perhaps Wyatt's too. Yet the thought of abandoning him felt impossible. Wyatt Callahan had become more than an ally in her quest for justice. He had become someone she couldn't bear to lose. Making a swift decision, Rosalie secured the journal in her saddlebag, then drew her derringer and turned back toward the clearing. She wouldn't leave him to face Blackwood alone. Whatever fate awaited them, they would meet it together. Moving as quietly as possible, she retraced her steps, pausing frequently to listen. The forest had gone eerily silent, even the birds hushed in the aftermath of gunfire. As she neared the clearing, voices carried to her Blackwood's cultured tones and another, weaker voice she recognized as Wyatt's. Admirable persistence, Mr. Callahan. 3 years hunting me, and here we are at last. Blackwood sounded almost conversational. I offered you a position once, as I recall. Said a man with your skills could go far in my organization. Go to hell. Wyatt's response was followed by a dull thud and a grunt of pain. You first, I think. Blackwood's voice hardened. But not before you tell me where the girl went with those documents. Rosalie edged closer, positioning herself behind a massive pine at the clearing's edge. From there, she could see Wyatt on his knees, blood streaming from a wound at his temple. Blackwood stood before him, revolver in hand. 2 of his men lay motionless on the ground. The sheriff was propped against a tree, clutching his bleeding leg, while the fourth gunman stood guard, rifle ready. "She's halfway to the federal marshal by now," Wyatt lied, his voice ragged but defiant. "It's over, Blackwood. You've lost." Always the optimist. Blackwood pressed the barrel of his revolver against Wyatt's forehead. "I've built my empire from nothing, Mr. Callahan. I've eliminated every threat, surmounted every obstacle. One woman with some moldering papers is hardly going to be my downfall." "You're wrong about her," Wyatt said, a hint of pride in his tone despite his dire situation. "Rosalie Fleming isn't just one woman. She's smarter, braver, and more determined than anyone I've ever known. If anyone can bring you down, it's her." The unexpected praise warmed Rosalie, even as fear for Wyatt's life nearly overwhelmed her. She needed to act, but how? Her small derringer was no match for their firearms, and she had no experience in gunfights. Then she remembered the pouch of cartridges in her pocket, the extra ammunition Wyatt had given her that morning, just in case. It wasn't much, but it might create enough distraction for Wyatt to act. Taking a deep breath, Rosalie threw the pouch as hard as she could toward the far side of the clearing. It landed with a thud, drawing the guard's attention. In that same moment, she stepped out from behind the tree and fired her derringer at Blackwood. Her aim was poor. The bullet only grazed his arm, but the surprise was enough. Blackwood staggered back, momentarily stunned, while Wyatt seized the opportunity to drive his shoulder into the mining magnate's midsection, toppling him to the ground. The guard swung his rifle toward Rosalie, but Wyatt was faster. Rolling across the ground, he grabbed the revolver Blackwood had dropped and fired twice. The guard collapsed, his rifle discharging harmlessly into the air. "Rosalie, get down," Wyatt shouted as Sheriff Townsend, despite his wounded leg, raised his own weapon. She dove behind a fallen log as shots exploded above her. When she dared to look again, Townsend lay still, and Wyatt was struggling with Blackwood in the center of the clearing. Despite his injuries, Wyatt seemed to be gaining the upper hand until Blackwood produced a hidden knife and plunged it into Wyatt's side. Wyatt gasped, his grip loosening enough for Blackwood to shove him away and stagger to his feet. "Enough of this," Blackwood snarled, retrieving his fallen revolver. "I'll finish you both myself." Rosalie's derringer was empty, Wyatt was wounded and unarmed, and Blackwood was raising his weapon for the killing shot. In that desperate moment, another gunshot cracked through the clearing, but it wasn't from Blackwood's revolver. The mining magnate jerked, a look of surprise crossing his features as a crimson stain blossomed on his chest. He turned slowly, his gaze fixing on something behind Rosalie. "You," he breathed, before crumpling to the ground. Rosalie whirled to find Mrs. Harrington standing at the edge of the clearing, a smoking rifle in her hands, and Mr. Wu beside her. "Never did like that man," the landlady said calmly, lowering her weapon. "Always thought he needed killing." Wyatt had collapsed to his knees, one hand pressed against his bleeding side. Rosalie rushed to him, tearing a strip from her petticoat to press against the wound. "You were supposed to run," he muttered, wincing as she applied pressure. "I'm hard to love," she replied, tears threatening despite her attempt at lightness. "Part of that is not following instructions well." A faint smile touched his bloodied lips. "Then I'll just have to love you harder." The unexpected declaration stole her breath. Before she could respond, Mr. Wu was beside them, opening a small pouch of medicinal herbs. "For wound," he explained, applying a paste to Wyatt's side after examining the injury. "Not too deep. He live." "Thank God," Rosalie breathed, her hand finding Wyatt's and squeezing tightly. "Mrs. Harrington approached, rifle still ready as she checked each of Blackwood's men to ensure they posed no further threat. "We need to move quickly. There will be more coming when these don't return." "How did you find us?" Rosalie asked as they helped Wyatt to his feet. "Followed Blackwood's men from town," Mr. Wu explained. "Saw them track you here." "The evidence?" Mrs. Harrington asked urgently. Safe, Rosalie assured her. In my saddlebag. My father's journal and all the testimonies. Then we must get it and you to safety immediately. The older woman shouldered her rifle. There's a mining camp 3 hours south where my brother works as foreman. Blackwood has no influence there. We can rest, tend to Mr. Callahan's wounds properly, then make arrangements to reach the federal marshal in Denver. With Mr. Wu's help, they managed to get Wyatt onto his horse, though his face was gray with pain. Rosalie rode beside him, ready to support him if he weakened. Mrs. Harrington led the way, with Mr. Wu bringing up the rear, both constantly watchful for pursuit. As they left the clearing, Rosalie glanced back at Blackwood's body, the man who had destroyed so many lives, including her family's, finally brought to justice. Not through courts or laws, but through the determined actions of those he had wronged. It wasn't the justice she had envisioned when she journeyed west, but perhaps it was the justice this wild territory demanded. The mining camp was a collection of simple cabins and tents nestled in a protected valley. Mrs. Harrington's brother, a burly, bearded man named Robert, greeted them with concern but asked no questions when his sister requested discretion and medical assistance. Wyatt was installed in a small cabin at the camp's edge, where a company doctor cleaned and stitched his wound properly. The knife had missed any vital organs, but he'd lost considerable blood and needed rest to recover his strength. Rosalie refused to leave his side, maintaining her vigil through the night as fever set in the body's natural response to trauma, the doctor assured her, but dangerous nonetheless. She bathed Wyatt's brow with cool cloths, monitored his breathing, and whispered encouragements when he stirred restlessly. In his delirium, he called out names Sarah, Michael, and once, with heart-wrenching clarity, Rosalie. Each time, she squeezed his hand and assured him she was there, that he wasn't alone. By dawn, his fever had broken, and he slept more peacefully. Rosalie, exhausted but relieved, allowed herself to doze in the chair beside his bed. She awoke to the sensation of fingers gently brushing hair from her face. Opening her eyes, she found Wyatt watching her, his blue gaze clearer than it had been since the fight. You look terrible, he said, his voice hoarse, but the familiar hint of humor returning. Such flattery, Mr. Callahan. She straightened, wincing at the stiffness in her neck from sleeping awkwardly. How are you feeling? Like I've been stabbed. His attempt at a smile turned to a grimace as he shifted position. But alive, thanks to you. You should have run when I told you to. And missed the opportunity to save your life? I think not. She poured water from a pitcher and helped him drink. Besides, I couldn't let you have all the heroic moments. A more genuine smile touched his lips. Never met a woman so determined to rush into danger. You said something when you were wounded, Rosalie ventured carefully. About loving me harder. Wyatt's expression sobered. I remember. He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. I meant it, Rosalie. Though I've no right to say such things to a woman like you. A woman like me? Educated. Refined. With a future back east where you belong. Is that what you think I want? She shook her head. Wyatt, I came west seeking justice, but I found something else too, a place where I'm valued for my mind and courage, not just my ability to pour tea and make polite conversation. It's a hard life out here for a woman alone. Who says I would be alone? She met his gaze steadily, summoning her courage. Unless you're planning to disappear once you're healed. Wyatt's hand tightened on hers. For 3 years, I've lived for nothing but vengeance. Didn't think beyond killing Blackwood.
His voice softened.
Then you stormed into my life with your stubbornness and your bravery, making me remember there might be more worth living for. Such as a copper-haired woman who's too stubborn for her own good. Who faces down killers with nothing but a derringer and sheer determination. His thumb traced circles on her palm. A woman I've come to admire, to care for, to love, against all my better judgment. Joy bloomed within her, unexpected and overwhelming. I think your judgment is improving, Mr. Callahan. Is that so, Miss Fleming? Indeed. She leaned forward, propriety forgotten as she pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, tender, a promise of more to come when he was stronger. I believe I might be falling in love with you too, despite your overprotective tendencies and brooding nature. Wyatt laughed, then winced as the movement pulled at his stitches. I'm too old for you. Too damaged. You're exactly what I need, she countered. A man who respects my mind and courage while still wanting to protect me. A man who understands what drives me because the same fire burns in him. And what about your life back east? Your studies? I'm thinking the Wyoming territory could use a good lawyer. She smiled. Especially with the railroad bringing more people west every day. There will be land disputes, contracts, all manner of legal matters to address. And where would this lawyer live exactly? There was a cautious hope in his eyes that made her heart swell. I own a perfectly good cabin as it happens. Need some work, but I believe the right partner could help make it a home. Partner in what sense, Miss Fleming? The teasing note in his voice couldn't disguise the genuine question beneath. In every sense, Mr. Callahan.
She squeezed his hand.
If you're amenable to such an arrangement, I believe I could be persuaded. His expression grew serious. But there's still the matter of Blackwood's operation. His death won't end it. He is partners, as he said. Then we'll continue what my father and uncle started. Determination steeled her voice.
Together.
The evidence we've gathered will be just the beginning. Wyatt studied her face. You truly aren't planning to return east, are you? My future is here now. She brushed her fingers lightly over his bearded cheek. With the work that needs doing. With you, if you'll have me. I'm not an easy man to love, Rosalie. I've got demons that won't be quickly exorcised. Then I'll just have to love you harder, she echoed his words, sealing the promise with another gentle kiss. 3 days later, Rosalie stood on the porch of the mining camp's main office, watching as a rider departed carrying sealed packages for the federal marshal in Denver. The documents, her father's journal, her uncle's evidence, and sworn statements from Mrs. Harrington, Mr. Wu, and others who had witnessed Blackwood's crimes would ensure that even with the man himself dead, his criminal enterprise would face justice. Wyatt joined her, moving carefully but steadily, his arm around her waist as much for the pleasure of holding her as for support. It's done, she said, leaning into his embrace. Now we wait. The wheels of justice turn slowly, he cautioned. Blackwood's partners won't go down without a fight. Let them fight. We'll be ready. She turned in his arms to face him. I've been thinking about our future, Wyatt. About that cabin. Have you now? A smile played at the corners of his mouth. And what conclusions have you reached, counselor? That perhaps we should make things official before setting up housekeeping together. Her cheeks warmed slightly. If you're interested in such conventional arrangements. Wyatt's expression softened. Are you proposing marriage, Miss Fleming? I believe I am, Mr. Callahan. She lifted her chin. Unless you'd prefer to maintain propriety and do the asking yourself. He laughed, the sound rich and genuine in a way she'd rarely heard from him. Rosalie Fleming, you are the most unconventional, magnificent woman I've ever known. His hands cradled her face. Yes, I'll marry you. Though I suspect you'll never stop surprising me. I certainly hope not. She smiled up at him. Life would be terribly dull otherwise. Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, one that would indeed prove neither easy nor conventional, but always bound by the love that had found them in the midst of danger and justice sought. 5 years later, Rosalie stood on the porch of the expanded cabin, watching as Wyatt taught their 4-year-old son, Edward, to ride his pony in the fenced paddock. The boys' delighted laughter carried on the summer breeze, a sound that never failed to warm her heart. So much had changed since that fateful day when Blackwood fell. The evidence they'd gathered had led to the dismantling of his criminal empire, with several of his partners now serving prison sentences. Others had fled the territory, their assets seized by the government. Silverdale had transformed as well. With Blackwood's influence gone, honest businesses flourished. Mrs. Harrington now served as mayor, the first woman to hold such a position in the territory, while Mr. Wu had opened a successful mercantile catering to the growing Chinese community. Rosalie herself had established a thriving legal practice, representing miners, homesteaders, and small business owners throughout the region. Her reputation for fairness and tenacity had even earned grudging respect from the male-dominated legal community. Wyatt had found his own path forward, serving first as deputy and now as sheriff of Silverdale. The badge he once wore as a U.S. Marshal had been replaced by one representing local justice, a justice he helped shape with a firm but compassionate hand. Their journey hadn't been without challenges. Wyatt's nightmares still came occasionally, though less frequently now. The ghosts of his past would always be part of him, but they no longer defined him. Together, they had built something stronger than their individual griefs: a family, a home, a future. "Mama, look," Edward called, sitting proudly atop his pony as Wyatt led them around the paddock. "I'm riding by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," she called back, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. Another month, and their family would expand again. As the sun began its descent toward the distant mountains, painting the landscape in gold and crimson, Wyatt lifted Edward from the pony and set him on his shoulders. Together they approached the porch, both wearing matching grins that never failed to melt Rosalie's heart. "Two fine horsemen," she observed, reaching up to ruffle her son's dark hair so like his father's. "I believe someone has earned his supper." "Did you see me, Mama? I wasn't scared at all," Edward declared proudly. "You were very brave," she agreed, accepting Wyatt's kiss as he reached the porch. "Just like your father." "And stubborn like your mother," Wyatt added with a wink, setting the boy down. "Go wash up now, partner. I'll be right in to help with those hard-to-reach places behind your ears." As Edward scampered inside, Wyatt drew Rosalie into his arms, his hand gently caressing her rounded belly. "How are my other two favorite people today?" "Restless," she replied, covering his hand with hers as the baby kicked. "I think we have another wild one on the way." "With our blood? I'd expect nothing less." He pressed a tender kiss to her forehead. "Any regrets, counselor? About choosing this life instead of Boston?" Rosalie looked around at the home they'd built, the expanded cabin with its new rooms for their growing family, the flourishing garden, the distant view of mountains that still took her breath away after all these years. "Not a single one," she answered truthfully. "Though I remain as difficult to love as ever, I suspect." Wyatt's laugh rumbled deep in his chest. "And I continue to love you harder every day, just as promised." As the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight, they stood together on the porch of the home they'd created, two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and forged a light that neither vengeance nor loss could extinguish. In the wild territory where justice often came at the barrel of a gun, they had discovered something more powerful: the enduring strength of love that refused to surrender, even when faced with the hardest of hearts and the most daunting of obstacles. For Rosalie Fleming and Wyatt Callahan, the greatest adventure hadn't been bringing down a criminal empire or seeking vengeance for past wrongs. It had been finding the courage to love fiercely and completely, building a future neither had dared to imagine in their darkest days. And in that love, stubborn, determined, and unyielding, they had found their truest justice and most profound peace.